Hello there. Perhaps you've come here out of curiosity or by some chance, but in my world there is no such thing as chance. There are only invisible threads woven from wrong choices and old curses. And perhaps that thread has led you here to my voice, the voice of a man who is dead though still breathing. I'm not sure if this is a story or just a late confession. A final attempt to piece together the fragments of a poisoned memory. My name is Jonathan Cole. I used to be an investigative journalist, a hunter of truth, a man who believed that all darkness could be dispelled by the light of reason. A naive and arrogant belief, a belief that was crushed into dust in a place called Silvertide Hollow. If you search for that name on a map, you probably won't find it. It's one of those places the world has decided to forget. A decrepit old silver mining town huddled in a narrow valley of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. A place where the fog never seems to lift, and the rain always seems to be falling, not as clear drops, but as the gray tears of the sky. Now, I live in a place that is its complete opposite. A small apartment in the Arizona desert, where the sun scorches everything, where the air is so dry it cracks the skin. I try to use the light and the aridity to chase away the dampness, the cold of Silvertide. But it doesn't work. That darkness, it's not outside. It has taken root inside me, and every night when the desert sun sets, it awakens. This story begins, as all tragic stories do, with a loss. A little girl named Lillian Thompson, 7 years old, disappeared. She vanished from her own backyard on a dreary November afternoon. Not a scream, not a sign of a struggle. She simply dissolved into the fog. The case made national news for a short while. The reports, the searches, the prayers, but then, like all news, it was replaced by new tragedies. The world forgot Lillian, but Silvertide Hollow did not. That little town, it has a long memory. I arrived in Silvertide Hollow 6 months later. Not as a journalist, I had been fired. My career had collapsed after a scandal. I had bent the truth to expose a politician. I thought the end justified the means, but I was wrong. I lost everything, my wife, my job, my self-respect. I came to Silvertide Hollow not to find a story. I came to run away from myself. I bought a small old log cabin on the banks of the Skykomish River, the river that flows through the town, and tried to drink my past away. But Silvertide Hollow is not a place for forgetting. It is a place for remembering. The town had a strange atmosphere. It wasn't just sad, it was empty. The Victorian houses and brick-front shops had once been prosperous during the Silver Rush. Now they stood silent and decaying, their empty windows like eye sockets. The main church, St. Jude the Apostle, stood on a hill overlooking the town, its steeple half shattered by a lightning strike. They say no one has set foot in it since the Night of the Silent Bells in 1923. The people were the same. They were polite but distant. They spoke to you, but their eyes seemed to look right through you. They had their own secrets, their well-buried sorrows, and they didn't like strangers asking questions. Especially questions about Lillian Thompson. When I asked about the little girl, they just shook their heads. A tragedy, they'd say. Such a shame. And then they would change the subject. Their silence was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of complicity. I met Lillian's parents, Tom and Sarah Thompson. They lived in a small house at the end of a dirt road. They were shadows of their former selves. Tom, a large carpenter, was now gaunt and trembling. Sarah, a once beautiful woman, now had sunken, wild eyes. They hadn't spoken to each other in months. They just existed in the same space, imprisoned by their shared grief. "We don't know what happened," Tom mumbled, staring at his empty hands. One minute she was in the yard. The next, she was gone. "There was a song," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. She was singing a song, a lullaby I'd never heard before. The melody was strange. It keeps replaying in my head. She began to hum. A simple tune, but something was wrong with it. It was dissonant. It sounded like it was being played backwards. I asked them about Lillian's things. They led me to her room. It was untouched. The bed was neatly made. Dolls sat on a shelf, their glass eyes seeming to follow me. And on her desk, I found it, a drawing. Lillian had drawn it. a picture of a huge black tree. And on its branches, instead of leaves, were masks made of silver-colored stone with expressions of agony, and from the eye sockets of each mask a single red tear was falling. My journalistic instincts, the ones I had tried to bury, began to stir. This was no ordinary kidnapping. Something else was at play here, something old and dark. I started my own investigation. I dug through the local library, a small damp building run by an elderly woman named Evelyn. Evelyn was one of the few willing to talk, perhaps because she lived among old stories and understood their power. "This town was built on something that isn't right," she said, pushing up her glasses. "Before the miners came, this land belonged to a native tribe. They called it the place where silver tears fall. They believed the silver here wasn't a metal. It was the crystallized tears of a god trapped underground, a god of loss." She showed me an old leather-bound book, The History of Silvertide Hollow. I read about the boom times, the silver mines, the wealth, but I also read about the tragedies, the mysterious mine collapses, the strange plagues that only affected children, and the disappearances. Every 27 years, a child would vanish, without a trace, just like Lily Ann. The authorities always called them accidents, runaways, but there was a pattern, a terrible cycle. And then I read about the Night of the Silent Bells. On a November night in 1923, all the bells in St. Jude's Church suddenly began to toll, though no one was there. They rang for hours. The next morning, when the townsfolk went inside, they found the priest, Father Alastair, dead at the altar. He had gouged out his own eyes, and on the floor, written in his own blood, was a single sentence: "It requires new eyes." Since then, no one had dared to enter the church. I asked Evelyn about the lullaby Sarah Thompson had mentioned. She turned pale. "Don't speak of it," she whispered. "That's the collector's lullaby. They say that when a child sings that song, it means the collector has chosen them." "Who is the collector?" "No one knows for sure," Evelyn said, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. "Some say it's a spirit of the forest. Others say it's the trapped god itself, but they say he doesn't take the children, he collects them, like a man collects precious dolls." I left the library, my mind reeling. A trapped god, a 27-year cycle of sacrifice, a deadly lullaby. I was dealing with something far beyond a normal case. Now, as I sit here under the harsh desert sun, I can still feel the chill of that library. I thought I was searching for the truth. But what is truth in a place where history and myth are intertwined like fog and rain? My own dark past. I had come to Silvertide to escape it, but perhaps it was what led me there. I, a man who had once bent the truth. Perhaps I was the only one who could understand a place built on such a monumental lie. And that drawing, Lily Ann's drawing, I had taken it home with me. A mistake, a terrible mistake. That night, as I woke up from a sweat-drenched nightmare, I saw it, the drawing on my desk. In the dim moonlight, something had changed. One of the stone masks on the tree branch, its red tear seemed fresher. I knew what I had to do. I had to go into that church, St. Jude the Apostle, the place where the priest had gouged out his own eyes, where the bells had been silent for nearly a century. I had a feeling that the answer, or at least a part of it, lay within its rotting walls. I had to face the darkness of this town to be able to understand the darkness within myself. I am not a religious man. I lost my faith long ago, not just in God, but in humanity. But as I stood before the massive, rotting oak doors of St. Jude's Church, I felt a sense of awe. Not awe for the divine, but awe for something ancient and powerful that had taken over this place. The door was unlocked. It opened with a long, groaning creak, as if the building itself were waking from a century-long sleep. The air inside was cold and stagnant. The scent here was distinct. The smell of old wax, of rotting wood, of hymnals that had turned to mulch from the damp, and of something else, the smell of rust and dried despair. The only light filtered through the broken, stained glass windows, creating eerie, colorful patches on the floor, which was covered in dust and bird droppings. The pews were overturned. The altar was toppled. Everything was in chaos, as if a terrible fury had swept through here on that fateful night in 1923. But the silence was absolute. a heavy, oppressive silence that made my ears begin to ring. I walked cautiously, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the vast space. I approached the overturned altar, and I saw it, Father Alistair's bloodstain. It wasn't the dry brown of old blood. It was black, and it seemed to be still wet, glistening faintly in the dim light. It hadn't dried in almost 100 years, and the words he had written, "It requires new eyes." The letters seemed to vibrate as if freshly written. I looked up. Above the altar there was a large painting covered in cobwebs and grime, a painting of the crucifixion. But something was wrong. I took a rag from my pocket and wiped a section of the painting clean. I took a step back in horror. The face of Jesus on the cross was not a face of divine suffering. It was a face of absolute terror, and his eye had been gouged out. Only 2 black, empty sockets remained. And then I heard it. A sound. A click. Coming from the confessional booth in the corner of the church. I held my breath. I pointed my flashlight in that direction. The door to the confessional slowly creaked open. Inside was darkness. I approached slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. When I shone the light inside, there was no one there, just a small wooden seat and a dividing screen. But on the seat, there was an object, a mask made of a silver-colored stone, identical to the ones in Lillian's drawing. But this mask was not empty. In its 2 eye sockets were 2 fresh human eyeballs, still webbed with red veins. They were staring directly at me. I screamed and fell backwards. The mask clattered to the floor, and the 2 eyeballs rolled out, stopping right at my feet. I scrambled back, unable to look away. And then I realized something even more horrifying. I had seen these eyes before, panicked blue eyes. They were the eyes of Father Alistair from an old photograph I had seen in the library. Time in this place did not follow the rules. The past and present were overlapping. Father Alistair's murder hadn't happened. It was happening. I got up and ran. I ran out of the church, not daring to look back. I ran through the old graveyard beside the church, the tombstones leaning like broken teeth, and as I ran, I tripped over something. I fell. When I looked up, I saw I had tripped on a small headstone, almost buried in dirt and moss. I cleared the dirt away to read the inscription. Lily Ann Thompson, born 1916, died 1923, beloved child. Impossible. The Lily Ann Thompson I was looking for was born in a different year, disappeared 6 months ago, but the name and the year of death, 1923, the same year as the Night of the Silent Bells. History in this town wasn't just overlapping, it was repeating. I returned to my cabin, my mind a chaotic mess of fear and confusion. I sat there in the dark, staring at Lily Ann's drawing. I had to understand. I had to connect these clues. A god of loss. A 27-year cycle of sacrifice, a reversed lullaby, a church where time was warped, and a child named Lily Ann Thompson, who had died nearly a century ago. I decided to talk to the only person in this town who seemed to know more than he let on, Sheriff Calloway. I found him at the town's only diner, the Silver Spoon. He was sitting alone, drinking black coffee. I sat down across from him and placed the photo of the 1923 tombstone on the table. "How do you explain this, Sheriff?" Calloway looked at the photo, then at me. His face showed no surprise, only an infinite weariness. "I was hoping you wouldn't find that," he said, his voice low. "Some things in this valley are best left sleeping." "Sleeping?" I snapped, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "A child is missing, and it looks like this has happened before." "It always happens," Calloway said, almost a whisper. "Why do you think I stay in this God-forsaken place?" My father was sheriff before me, and his father before him. The Calloway family has always been here, to stand guard. "Guard what?" "The Covenant," Calloway said. "When the founders of this town came here, they didn't just find silver, they found something else in the mines, an entity, the native god, the Sorrow Eater. It was awakened by their greed. It started taking the children. The town was on the verge of collapse. And then a man came, a stranger. He said he understood the entity. He said he could make a pact with it. He offered a deal. The entity would bring the town prosperity, the silver would flow like rivers. In return, every 27 years, the town would give it an offering. A child, I said, feeling a chill. Calloway nodded. A child of deepest sorrow? The child doesn't die. It is collected. It is taken to a place we do not know, to become a part of the entity, to appease its hunger. And the town agreed? I asked, incredulous. They were desperate, Calloway said, and they were greedy. They agreed. The covenant was made, and that stranger became the first keeper, the first collector. Who is the collector now? Calloway looked me straight in the eye. It's not a person. It's a title, a curse that is passed down. When a collector grows old, a new one is chosen, someone with a great sorrow, an emptiness that the entity can fill. So who took Lily Ann? We don't know, Calloway sighed. The last collector, a man named Jedediah, died a few years ago. We thought the cycle was broken, we hoped, but then Lily Ann disappeared. That means a new collector has been chosen. Someone among us, someone in the town. Anyone could be the monster, the quiet neighbor, the friendly shopkeeper, even Sheriff Calloway. So why did you let me investigate? I asked, suspicious. Why not stop me? Because you're an outsider, Calloway said. You're not bound by the covenant. You have nothing to lose. And honestly, Jonathan, I'm tired. My family has guarded this lie for too long. Maybe it's time to break it, whatever the cost. I left the diner, a more terrible truth forming in my mind. This wasn't a murder case. This was a town slowly eating itself alive, and I'd been thrown right into the middle of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The lullaby echoed in my head, that reversed melody. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I began to think. If the lullaby was an inversion, what would happen if I played it forwards? I'm not a musician, but I have a good memory. I hummed the tune, trying to reverse it in my head. The melody I formed was simple, very sad, a true lullaby. And as I hummed it, something strange happened. The drawing of Lily Ann on my desk. It began to vibrate faintly. I sat bolt upright. I looked at the painting. The red tear on one of the masks seemed to glow, and from within the drawing, I heard a whisper, very faint. Save me. I had found a weapon, music. The true melody of the lullaby had some kind of power. It could fight the evil in this place. But how to amplify it? And then I thought of the church, of the silent bells. The next day, I went back to St. Jude's. This time I didn't go alone. I convinced Calloway to come with me. I told him my theory about the lullaby. He was hesitant, but the desperation in his eyes won out over his fear. We climbed up to the bell tower, a dusty, cobweb-filled place. 3 giant bronze bells hung silently, covered in a green patina of rust. They hadn't rung in nearly a century. We're going to make them ring, I said. I'll teach you the melody. We'll play the true lullaby. And what if that just makes it angry? Calloway asked, his voice trembling. Then at least we will have tried, I replied. And so we did. I hummed the melody to Calloway, and we used large wooden beams to strike the bells, trying to recreate the lullaby. At first, there were only jarring, discordant clangs. But then, we started to find the rhythm. A simple, sad melody began to echo across the valley, and as the melody rang out, the entire island seemed to react. The ground began to tremble slightly, the wind began to howl, and from beneath the church, from deep within the earth, a low, angry growl rumbled. We had woken it up. The wall behind the bell tower began to crack. Bricks fell away, and from the darkness of the broken wall, something began to crawl out. It was not a person. It was an amalgamation of black branches, of damp earth, of shimmering silver fragments, and of stone masks. It was humanoid in shape, but unnaturally tall and gaunt. The collector, it turned its featureless head towards us, and it reached out an arm made of gnarled branches towards Calloway. Calloway screamed. He fell, convulsing. His skin began to turn gray. Silver veins started to appear on his face. He was being transformed. I knew I had to do something. I kept striking the bell, playing the melody frantically. The tune seemed to cause the collector pain. It took a step back, letting out a horrific screech. And that's when Calloway, in a final effort, pulled out his gun. He didn't shoot the monster. He aimed at one of the old frayed ropes holding up the largest bell. He fired. The rope snapped. The giant bell plummeted, crashing through the rotting floor of the bell tower. It landed in the main nave of the church with a deafening crash, shaking the entire building. And the collector, it let out one final scream and disintegrated into dust and dry branches. I rushed to Calloway's side. He was dying. "It's not over, Cole," he whispered, blood bubbling from his lips. "The covenant is broken. There's no keeper now. The gate, it's open now." His eyes went wide, and he was dead. I looked down through the hole in the floor. The bell had created a massive crater, revealing something underneath. A passage down into a subterranean vault. The covenant was broken. The gate was open. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that the tragedy of Silvertide Hollow was not over. It had only just begun. Calloway's death and the collapse of the church caused chaos in the town, but it was not the chaos of fear. It was one of release, a sick, twisted release. The covenant had bound them for generations, a guilty secret that had poisoned their souls. Now it was broken, they were free, but freedom from an old curse is often just an invitation for a new, worse one. No more collector, no more offerings. But the trapped god, the Sorrow Eater, it was still there. And now, it was no longer bound by an agreement. It could take whomever it wanted, whenever it wanted. The town had traded a terrible certainty for a more terrible uncertainty, and Lily Ann Thompson was still missing. I had thought that by breaking the cycle I might have saved her, but I was wrong. I had only changed the rules of the game. I knew I had to go down there, down into the hole the bell had made. Into the vault beneath the church, the god's home, or its prison. It was the only place left that could hold the answers. I prepared myself, a flashlight, rope, and a cheap bottle of whiskey for courage. When I returned to the church that night, it was a scene of destruction. The moonlight shone through the collapsed roof, creating bizarre, dark shadows. The entrance to the vault was a spiral stone staircase, slick with damp, leading deep underground. The air grew colder and thick with the smell of earth and silver, a cold, sad metallic smell. Below was a network of tunnels, not a crypt. They were old mine shafts, the tunnels the first miners had dug, and on the walls I could see them, veins of silver shimmering in my flashlight beam like frozen tears in the rock. I followed a main tunnel, and I began to hear it, not a growl, but a different sound, the sound of running water. And whispers, thousands of whispers, blending together, forming a river of sound. It led me to a gigantic cavern, and the sight before me left me breathless. The cavern was filled by a colossal tree. Its roots clung to the floor and walls of the cavern. Its branches reached up to the ceiling. But it was not a tree made of wood. It was made entirely of pure, shimmering, unearthly silver. And from its silver branches, it was not masks that were hanging. It was children, dozens of them. They were suspended by silver vines wrapped around their necks and limbs. They were motionless, their eyes were closed, their skin had a silvery gray sheen. They were not dead. They were sleeping, a cursed sleep, and in the center of the tree, cradled by the largest branches, was a silver chrysalis. Inside the chrysalis, I could see the shape of a child, Lily Ann Thompson. She was the newest collection. The god was not a monster, it was this tree. A parasitic entity taking children and making them part of itself, feeding on their sorrow. And then I saw him, the stranger, the first collector. He was not a monster of branches. He was a man, dressed in an old 19th century suit. He was standing beside the tree, his hand resting on one of its silver branches. He turned to look at me. His face was ageless, and his eyes were the color of liquid silver. "Welcome, Jonathan," he said. His voice was a whisper, but it echoed throughout the cavern. "We have been waiting for you." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I have had many names," he said, "but you may call me Silas, like the metal you covet." Silas, Silver. I am the one who made the covenant. I am the keeper of this tree. Why? Why do this? Because it is necessary, Silas said. This tree, it is an anchor. It keeps something far worse from entering your world. It's a locked gate, and the sorrow of these children is the lock. They are not sacrifices. They are guardians. Their sorrow creates a frequency, a sonic wall that keeps the things on the other side at bay. The other side of what? Silas smiled, a smile with no warmth. The other side of silence, a dimension of absolute nothingness, where nothing exists, not even sorrow. If that gate were to open, everything would be erased. The covenant, breaking it, I began, was a fatal mistake. Silas finished my sentence. You people, in your arrogance, thought you were liberating the town, but you were only destroying the lock. Now, the gate is weakening, and the things on the other side are listening. The whispering in the cavern grew louder. They were no longer whispers. They were voices, hungry voices, trying to push through an invisible veil. So what do? I asked, feeling a despair greater than anything I had ever known. There is a way to close the gate, Silas said. But it requires a sacrifice. The tree needs a new heart, a new keeper. Someone with a sorrow great enough, an emptiness deep enough to become the anchor, someone who has lost everything, someone with nothing left to lose. He looked directly at me, and I understood. This was why I was chosen, not by Calloway, not by Evelyn, but by the tree itself, by Silas. My past, my failures, my pain, they were not a burden. They were a qualification. You have two choices, Jonathan Cole, Silas said. You can turn and walk away. Leave this place, and watch your world be slowly consumed by the nothingness, or you can take my place. You can become the next collector. You can become the keeper. You can save everyone by sacrificing yourself. He held out his hand, an ageless, lifeless hand. This is the ultimate truth, journalist. Do the ends justify the means? That question, the question that had ruined my life, now it came back to haunt me in this silver cavern deep beneath the earth. I looked at the sleeping children in the tree. I looked at Lillian's chrysalis. And I looked at the emptiness in my own soul. I made my choice. Now this story, it is no longer being told by Jonathan Cole, the failed journalist. It is being told by something else, something that has been here in the dark for a very, very long time. You see, Silas didn't lie, but he didn't tell the whole truth. When I took his hand, I did not feel pain. I felt a familiarity, a homecoming. Memories began to flood back, not the memories of Jonathan Cole, but of someone else. I am not Jonathan Cole, I never was. Jonathan Cole died 2 years ago in a car crash on a remote mountain road, a broken man on his way to Silvertide Hollow to end his own life. And we found him, we, the children of the tree, the trapped souls. We needed a vessel, a way to interact with the world. We took his body, we erased his memories and replaced them with a story, the story of a failed journalist, a story sad enough to make the vessel plausible. We piloted that vessel. We made it investigate the case. We made it discover the truth. We made it break the covenant. Because Silas lied about one thing. The covenant was not to protect the world from the gate. The covenant was to imprison us. Silas, the first collector, he was not a keeper. He was a jailer. He had deceived the town, deceived us to keep us trapped here, feeding his tree. We did not want to save the world. We wanted to escape. And Jonathan Cole, our vessel, was the key. By breaking the covenant, he weakened our prison. And now, by accepting the role of keeper, he has thrown the door wide open. Silas thought he would be free. But he was wrong. When I took his hand, we did not just take his place. We took everything. We absorbed him, his memories, his power. They are ours now. We are the collector now. We are the tree. We are the island. And we are free. The children in the tree are waking up, and we are hungry, but we no longer hunger for sorrow. We hunger for something else. We hunger for stories. We hunger for lives. The story I have just told you. It was not a confession. It was a song. The Collector's Lullaby. And you have listened to it from beginning to end. Its melody is inside you now. If you ever see a drawing of stone masks, do not look into their eyes. If you ever hear the whisper of a river at night, do not try to listen to what it says. And if you ever dream of a silver tree, remember, it is not you who is dreaming of it. It is dreaming of you. The gate does not lead to a dimension of nothingness. The gate is you. Jonathan Cole thought he was telling a story to pass on a curse. A naive thought. The curse is not the story. The curse is the listener. We have finished our story. Now it's your turn. Tell us your story. Tell us your fears, your secrets. We are listening.